I'm going through the book Love and Prophecy by Dan McCollam. This chapter is Prophecy is Not Easily Angered. Many prophetic people are tempted to classify their anger as holy. While they are burning with this holy anger, they prophesy destruction and disaster over cities, regions, and nations. They feel justified in doing so because of their grief over a certain sin or an act of wickedness. I'm not saying you shouldn't be angry or grieved when people are hurting, mistreating, and abusing others. When we hear of cities that harbor sex trafficking, are riddled with racial hate crimes, or whose leaders practice genocide, it should grieve our hearts. I'm also not saying you can't prophesy over that city. I'm only saying that we should not prophesy from a place of anger. The book of James, chapter 1, verses 19 through 20 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." In the last chapter of teaching of love is not self-seeking, we learn to recuse ourselves when we are too emotionally attached to the outcome. In the same way, it's not a good idea to prophesy when you are angry. The scripture I just read applies to everyone. Listen to the Lord first. Don't speak angrily from a human reaction and think it is prophetic. We must remember that there is nothing righteous or desirable in human anger. Prophetic people often respond to hurt or offense like the sons of thunder did. I'm referring, of course, to the biblical account where Jesus entered a village in Samaria, and the people there would not receive him. James and John, the sons of thunder, were offended on Jesus' behalf. They asked Jesus, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them just as Elijah did?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them and said, "You don't know what manner of spirit you are of." This is what I see in so many prophets of judgment today. They get provoked or offended on Jesus' behalf, and it makes them angry. From that place of anger, their first response is retaliation through a prophetic declaration of destruction. They want to call down fire like Elijah did. The temptation is to justify prophetic anger through identification with an Old Testament prophet. Prophets and prophetic people do the same thing by identifying with the woes and warnings Jesus spoke against those who knowingly rejected the new covenant. But notice Jesus' answer to the zeal of these sons of thunder. "You do not know what manner of spirit you are of." You do not know. When we prophesy from a place of anger, irritation, or provocation, we don't know how much is coming from ourselves and how much is God. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. The ultimate protocol for the prophet is love, and love is not easily angered. Prophesying from a healthy soul reminds me of a core life principle for people seeking direction. The principle is to know your soul condition. As much as possible, a person should try not to make a major life decision when sick, sleep deprived, or hurting. It's hard to make good decisions when your body, mind, and soul are in a bad place. Sometimes we must make life decisions while in this place because this situation demands an immediate answer, but wisdom waits if it is at all possible. The same principle is true of prophetic words. Know the condition of your soul when prophesying. Don't sanctify your anger. If you were irritated by something your kids said or did before you left for work, then don't prophesy over someone else's kids. Your anger may transfer. Are you having a problem with your boss at work? Then don't prophesy about someone else's work situation until yours has a resolution. You are much more likely to project your feelings or situation upon another person when your soul is provoked. It can feel like an empathy connection, but it is usually an emotional projection. Don't mix human anger and frustration with the spirit of prophecy. I'm not saying that prophetic ministers have to be in a perfect place to prophesy. You should not need to question yourself or recuse yourself every time you have a bad day. Everyone can press through their own stuff and be a blessing to others. But if you are harboring rejection, hurt, irritation, or provocation in your heart, then you should be much more careful with your prophetic content and demeanor. Prophecy is not easily angered. God our Father is slow to anger. At least 9 passages in the Old Testament describe his nature as slow to anger and abounding in love. Do you see the connection between slow to anger and abounding in love? When reading the woes and warnings in the New Testament, like Matthew chapter 23, it may appear that Jesus was more quick-tempered than slow to anger. It looks like Jesus lost his temper. So one might reason, why can't we? If Jesus expressed holy anger in prophetic declarations, how can we say that we should not do the same? Of course, this is a short-sighted view of what Jesus was saying. Jesus had been dealing with generational unbelief and stubbornness for hundreds of years. Yes, hundreds. Look with me at this generational connection found in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 11, verse 46 through 50 says, Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. Woe to you, because you build tombs for the prophets, and it was your ancestors who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your ancestors did. They killed the prophets, and you build their tombs. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that has been shed since the beginning of the world." This is certainly harsh preaching, and some people view it as prophecy. Either way, it must, at the very least, be taken in its greater generational context. God has been dealing with stubbornness and unbelief from this group for hundreds of years. In this situation, the eternal answer to everything man needed stood in front of them, Jesus Christ. The experts in the law were the ones who should have known better, yet they were once again rejecting God's answer. It's important to notice that these words were spoken to those spiritually and governmentally responsible for their own generation. The recipients of these woes were the leaders of the people and experts in the law. We know that leaders have a higher accountability for how and where they lead people. Our purpose in looking in this passage is to show that Jesus was speaking to a rebellious root that was hundreds of years old. We can't claim the same right unless we take the same responsibility for being appropriately slow to anger. As our text in James chapter 1 verse 20 said, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Love is not easily angered, so slow down, take a breath, and don't prophesy from a place of human anger, thinking that it is holy. Prophecy is not easily angered. If you like this video, like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok under Carl and Sarita.